Hello, my name is Renee Owens, and the title of this presentation is Bioengineering, Bioethics, and a Brave New World. I will be discussing bioengineering and bioethics since my research paper centered around both, as well as our society's perception of designer babies and what these technologies may change about our current societal structure in the future. In this video, however, I wanted to focus my attention on Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, since I believe the novel brought forward an interesting argument on this subject. First, I'd like to give some definitions. Bioengineering can be defined as the use of artificial tissues, organs, or organ components to replace damaged or absent parts of the body. Also considered another term for genetic engineering, which is defined as the deliberate modification of the characteristics of an organism by manipulating its genetic material, which is more of the definition I was going towards for my paper. Bioethics can be simply defined as the ethics of medical and biological research. However, bioethics has evolved to now cover a broader range of topics such as genetics, biomedical research, and reproductive technologies. In my research paper, I discuss the satirical novel Brave New World by Aldous Huxley that I read in high school and I thought brought a very interesting argument on the topic of bioengineering and designer babies. To give a brief overview of the story, this new civilization takes place in the future after the presumed crumble of our own. In this utopia, known as the world state, everyone is predetermined for what career and what place they'll have in the societal hierarchy. The embryos are developed and born in this place known as the hatchery, and in the hatchery, these embryos are created and manipulated to make identical human beings within the 5 caste levels, and that will cause them to enjoy what they do and be content within their caste system. The 5 levels are alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and epsilon, with the alpha and beta embryos being at the top of the hierarchy. The alpha and beta humans are modified to be stronger and smarter than the other 3 castes, and each embryo remains intact and unduplicated. However, for the other 3 caste embryos, they're split 96 times to create identical humans, which helps create stability in the civilization because they can perform identical tasks. Another way that they retain structure in this society is by ensuring that the lower castes stay inferior. And they do so by depriving the embryos of oxygen to reduce their intelligence, and by treating them with alcohol so they are short in stature. Bernard, our protagonist, is a member of the alphas, but he is smaller and has less muscle mass than the other alpha men. This already makes him feel like an outcast, and we soon learn he still holds values from the old society, such as love, while everyone else around him acts with lust and impulse, which further isolates him. We can kind of see Bernard as a personification of our current societal morals and values. As the story progresses, Bernard takes a trip to the Savage Reservation, or what it's called, which is what is left of the Old World civilization, where natural procreation still exists, and God, things like that. There, he meets John, who is born from a woman who was stranded from visiting from the world state. She's a beta, and another man that was stranded there. So he's pretty much born in the civilization and raised here, even though his parents know of the old world. And Bernard decides to take John back with him to the world state. And John's never seen the technology that the world state has, or any of the morals and values that the world state holds, or what is left of them anyway. And he's only heard stories from his parents. And he's disgusted by their lack of values, the fact that they use this suppressant drug called soma to pretend to be happy, and just how the overall structure of the society is. Everyone only wants to be happy in the world state, and we see John become more and more as a protagonist because Bernard seemed satisfied with the society after bringing John to the world state, which gained him the sense of belonging he wanted, because he gained the popularity from everyone else from bringing this new research item that was a man that wasn't born in the world state. And John only wants truth, while everyone else around him is concerned with just being happy and using the soma to replicate that. John wants truth, and he's not wanting to use these substances and give in to these temptations to pretend to be happy. And so John becomes more and more unstable the longer he stays in the world state. And instead of using soma to suppress these feelings, he begins to whip himself. And the self-punishment somehow is supposed to free him from feeling this way about the society. Which this only draws more attention to him, and this makes the audience excited because they see him whipping himself. He's already new to this civilization, and he's whipping himself. They don't understand why. They all are concerned with more happiness, and he's provoking pain on himself, so they're very fascinated. And this causes him to take a moment and break away and give in to these temptations of his, which ultimately does him in, and he is found by members of the audience from the previous night hung in his lighthouse. This novel to me is important because it brings the possible consequences these technologies have to a drastic reality. We need to think and consider all of the consequences before we move forward, because this isn't a technology we can enthusiastically develop without considering fully the potential consequences, like we do with technology such as automobiles. Another consideration we need to make is how accessible we will make this technology to everyone. Because if we begin to genetically modify humans, parents will be able to choose the traits their child has and try to give them an advantage. And if not everyone has access to the same ability, this creates a divide in our society. Like other health-related care issues, accessibility is crucial to the overall well-being of our society and its morals. Like lately, we've been having issues with healthcare and how available it is to needy families and people who can't afford buying healthcare from like their jobs or things like that. We see kind of a backlash with the change in the healthcare laws and things like that. So this definitely ties in with how we make things accessible to everyone without leaving people behind. And when it comes to predetermining the physical and mental attributes of our next generation, it is almost even more detrimental to our society if we're divided between the haves and the have-nots. Because those who are able to change their children to be this predetermined set of, oh, they're stronger, they're smarter, they have these more desired attributes in their lives, this becomes an issue of, well, what happens to those who aren't able to do that, and where do they fall when the society starts changing the dynamic between who allows these people to have these abilities and who doesn't. So just going back to the caste system for a moment, this new civilization was only able to come into fruition because the old one, which is our current society, fell, and those who began rebuilding recreated this caste system from nothing. So there was nothing because the fall of the current government before, so they had the opportunity to change it to what is now the world state. Those who are in the lower caste in this world state are manipulated to not know any different from what they have now, and they don't even understand where they lie, so the society can exist with the structure and stability they desire. If we were to begin genetic engineering, everyone would either have to pretend to be identical, or the society would have to divide between superior and inferior. Either way, the change would have disastrous results before it was ever successful. Just to do a quick overview of the two characters I've mentioned and the themes they present, Bernard is the alpha who didn't have the same attributes as other alpha men and seemed to be a strong example of our current society, but once he was able to use John to gain this popularity, we find his values to only run skin deep. John, however, is the boy born on the reservation whose mother was from the world state, and we slowly see him become a much better representation of our current societal morals because he sees how wrong the structure is of the world state, and he knows that there's more to life than just being happy all the time. He knows that there's pain that happens. John's disgusted by the world state, how they act on impulse without morals, how they only seek this happiness, like I said. Even if they aren't, they use this soma to alter their minds and pretend like they are happy. Once he sees the people become excited for him punishing himself, he sees to give in to this impulse for a brief moment and then subsequently hangs himself in order to remove himself from the disgust he later feels with himself for giving in to this temptation. Just to quickly recap the author's arguments in this short little summation. Overall, this satire shows how we often become overly enthusiastic about technological advancements without fully considering the consequences. When we begin bioengineering humans, and if we begin doing so, we run the huge risk of losing our moral principles. When also considering morals, the parallel between the world state and savage reservation is the author illustrating that this technology isn't necessarily going to fix all of our problems, but may rather strip the moral principles away that make our society so much more peaceful to live in. Finally, this hierarchy and strategic method to retain uniformity may allow stability and structure on the surface, but it doesn't mean it gives us happiness and a moral society overall. And finally, just to conclude my arguments, we need to fully consider the consequences of this technology before we can advance it. Otherwise, we run the risk of negatively impacting our future generations and our society as a whole. We must also consider the accessibility of these technologies because we do not want to bring Huxley's world to a reality and drastically divide our society between the haves and the have-not. And I think this is prevalent to many things in our world right now with healthcare, citizenship, things like that. And I think we need to really iron down those before we can begin furthering this development, because that only makes things much more complicated if we further this technology before considering its full consequences.